going from having a salary to not having a salary in the early days of starting a company is one of the craziest
Oh
binaries.
yeah.
You're literally looking at your savings account, your investment accounts go up month over month to them going down
Yeah, they're
month
not even
over
flat.
month.
It's like
They're not even
yeah,
flat. Yeah, they're literally like you're withdrawing.
Speaking patterns break the code, pre-trained pod.
All right, hey guys, welcome back to the Pre-Trained Pod, where AI scientists talk shop and talk shit. My name is Rich, a AI research fellow at the University of Cambridge. With me, as always, the one and only, the inimitable Pierce Freeman.
Hey everybody, I'm Pierce, AI founder based in San Francisco, and I've built and sold multiple AI startups.
All right, Pierce, today you're in the hot seat, buddy.
Oh boy,
Okay,
looking back.
enough of me chatting last week. I want to talk about you today, man. And again, I want to remind everyone what we're doing in this episode and last episode is a little different. It's the end of 2025. And so what we thought we'd do is do a little recap, a little introspection, if you will. Last episode, I was talking to you guys about my PhD experience, what I've been up to, some projects that I think are interesting, some research that I worked on. For today's episode, I want to flip the script. I want to talk about you, buddy. I want to start off by asking you the same question that you posed me, if you will, which
Okay.
is looking back on this year, what do you think is the theme that encapsulates your experience?
It wasn't the easiest year, let me tell you. I had days when I was just feeling the highs of highs, days when I was feeling some pretty low lows, really felt like the startup roller coaster. I think this was the first time that I feel like something that I've built has actually reached a level of product market fit where people want it so badly. They feel like it's a legitimate painkiller, not just a vitamin.
Right.
And I thought I felt that on a few things in the past, but I think 2025 was the year where I was really like, oh, wow, there's something here.
Okay, well, what is this? What are we talking about, dude?
This is Say What? This is the social media management tool that I've been building over the last 1.5 years now with Womatai.
Okay. So yeah, right. So Will wasn't on the show and you
I think
guys
our first YouTube video. In fact.
I think it was our first YouTube video. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So we should say Will is your co-founder, I guess, right? So he's the CEO, you're the CTO. You've been building up this whole platform for the last year and a half or so.
Yeah, this idea is really crazy. And I think on the surface level, kind of cringe. Like certainly my parents were very curious about the company when I first started doing this. But look, I mean, social media as a whole has evolved from just you posting your cat photos to people actually trying to do lead generation on it. And I think the thing that really got me when Will pitched me on this earlier last year was he had surveyed the whole ecosystem of tools as a content creator himself, right? So he didn't come at this from trying to start a company. He came at this from he was trying to build a personal brand on LinkedIn in order to start another company outside the world of social media. And he tried these tools and he was like, they're all bad. And I was like, okay, but how much are you paying for these bad tools? And he's like, I'm paying hundreds of dollars a month.
Oh, wow.
And
what are these tools that he was looking at?
So the biggest one's Tapio.
Okay.
That's been around for a little while. There's a long tail of other ones, but if anyone knows of one, they'll probably know of that one. And it's just LinkedIn. So it's not omni-channel. It's not multi-platform. It's just focused on making content for LinkedIn, researching the best performing content on LinkedIn, looking at the analytics of the content that you post there. They've really carved out this niche just for LinkedIn.
So it's basically a wrapper around LinkedIn where you can craft content that using this platform you can see has more impact on different users or something like that. Like
I didn't really know almost anything about LinkedIn content when I started this game, but I was expecting it to be a little bit like YouTube and Twitter and whatever. All these other social networks usually have a creator tool for people who are trying to write or post content. YouTube's analytics are great, like first rate. You can see where are people watching this? How many followers did I get from these shorts? And the idea is you kind of want to iterate to be able to find your niche and then improve on it from there, right? Basically, the only analytics or tooling that LinkedIn has for creators is the same LinkedIn box on the homepage that we've all used. You know what I mean?
Wow.
You're literally
Okay.
just putting text into that box, maybe attaching some images, and then sending it off to the wild. There's not an additional platform of tooling that people on LinkedIn use to make content. It's
So
just
you
that
can't
thing.
see how well is this post doing, who's viewing this, who are my
You
readers.
can, but it's buried. It's like really deep in there, and it's not set up in this way where you can compare and contrast and directly attribute, okay, given how much I've grown, this is the post from which we've grown on, you know? So
Gotcha.
there's a big analytics component to that too. And it's really just full platform. You know, like people don't really know what to write about. They want some inspiration. They want to kind of have a notion of what's going to work, what formats are useful. And that's what the product is. It's saying you can come in, literally know nothing. We're going to generate you the ideas of what we think is going to resonate with your buyer or the people that you want to follow you for whatever reason. We're going to help you write that content. We're going to help you post that content. We're going to help you analyze that content to figure out what's working well and what's not. And we're also going to let you help engage with the community that you're starting to develop around your content. So like any comments you want to respond to, that thing. It's just your one-stop shop for LinkedIn.
Gotcha. And so, what made you feel comfortable starting this sort of a company? I guess, like, what were you doing before this?
So immediately before this, I was working for probably like a year and a half, 2 years after leaving Globality on generic computer use tooling. So it was looking at a lot of browser use stuff specifically. And what I ended up building was a pretty generic horizontal platform that would let people automate things online. Go to some website, take some action, step through, yada, yada, yada. But figured out I feel like selling a horizontal platform as a sole proprietor or like a really small team is a super tough thing to do. There's a lot of market education that you have to do in order to succeed in that you kind of need funding in order to accomplish properly. So I said, okay, time to find a specific persona that can really resonate with this and save a lot of time. And went after the QA market for that. So quality assurance people that are actually doing software testing. Cause I was like, this could save you a ton of time. Literally just automate all your flows. We'll use these durable selectors. You can use natural language. And now there's starting to be more companies that do this. I was doing this back in 2023.
So these are like the open
Um,
source projects you were working on, Mountaineer, and
It was built on an early version of Mountaineer that I was using internal at the time. But no, this was like a pay to play product. It was called
oh, I see.
Selectify.
Okay,
And you'd go there, you'd set up your test flows. It would help people automate. It would use Playwright to actually boot up a browser and go through the application. I thought it was actually pretty neat. But as I actually went out to the market and started selling this thing, the people that were part of QA teams were very reticent to adopt something because they saw it coming at their jobs. They
Mm,
actually saw it as like direct competition with them building an organization within companies. And they were very worried that AI could just take their jobs away. So they were not a good buyer persona. And I was just running into wall after wall after wall as I was trying to sell this thing where I was like, the tech is good, but the buyer just doesn't want to buy. So I, could have found another buyer. I think probably an engineering team head would have been a better person to sell into
hmm,
in hindsight, at the very least. But the market just wasn't developed enough. Like people didn't really know what it was or what the ROI was. So what I was really looking for were app layer ideas where you could use the same backend tech. Like you could kind of call yourself as an API. And the idea of social media is a little bit more actually akin to where people are investing so much time. So it ended up being, I think, a much better user demographic to sell into than some of this like QA tooling itself.
so why do you think you've now found product market fit with say what as opposed to this like more internal tooling thing? Because on the surface, it kind of feels like both are good ideas, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's purely a question of the market, which I think is something that I haven't had to face myself historically because I've usually had, salespeople or sales teams that were actually going out and trying to seed the market, product marketing people that are trying to educate them. When you're bootstrapping a company, that all literally falls on you. So any mismatch in the market not being that interested in what you're selling, you feel very deeply. And I actually think, incidentally, it makes sense to listen to that signal. A lot of people, I think, feel so dogmatic about what they are creating that they want to sell that very thing at all costs. And there are a lot of success stories about if you just power through for long enough, eventually people will actually see the vision. I think it's also situation dependent, but I think to stick it out for the real long haul, you have to have a strong suspicion that everyone else is wrong.
Right.
And you also have to have a lot of funding to keep you going until you're proven right. But it's a pretty big risk, right? I think certainly the safer option is to say, I'm going to look at the market for what people want right now and try to meet them where they are. And I think in the case of this, Will knowing the market, knowing people in the market was very helpful. So we were able to talk to them about what their problems were. But I think what really resonated with me was that the people that we were talking to were spending so many hours a day of their life just on managing their social media presence.
Hmm.
And these aren't influencers. These are like heads of sales or heads of marketing. It's like pretty busy people that are trying to use LinkedIn for some business objective. Like they're trying to sell their product or they're trying to like build up a personal brand to try to sell themselves. And they were spending all this time. They still weren't getting particularly good results. And the quality that I like the most of it is the pitch can become trying to increase people's revenue
Right.
versus trying to minimize their costs. And I think it's certainly a way easier sales cycle for whatever reason to convince people that you're going to make them money versus you making them the same amount of money, but you're just doing it via cost savings.
Yeah,
Like
it's like
people are not interested in one and they're very interested in the other.
yeah, I mean, I think people when they're given the choice of, hey, do you want to make more money or do you want to make more money by cutting down your costs? Much rather prefer the sort of the infinite possible gain that they could make by just spending a
Yeah.
little bit more money, but then maybe getting 100x return, or 1,000x return. I think people, especially the people that you're targeting here, are like big dreamers, right? And that can see their product really, really grow. So cutting down on costs is maybe less interesting, but more interesting is selling them this vision of potential like infinite growth if they just use say what. So how did you then actually build this thing, man? I mean, like day one, you have a blank GitHub. What's the first thing you do?
Yeah, so it was a kind of blank GitHub. I think one of the interesting things was I had this existing software stack and I was like, how do I fit this into the new thing that we needed to build? But I think approaching it, I knew that there were a few different puzzle pieces that probably had to work together. One was something client side, right? We want to sync to users' actual LinkedIn sessions. And like one way to do that is for us to grab some of the cookies that they have locally. So we have a browser extension to do some of that stuff. We also will do that for like local routing of requests for people. And then you need, some back end and some front end component. And I'll tell you actually the story of the back end, since the client side is just a Chrome extension. That's, pretty straightforward to do and pretty limited to actually what you can do in the extension. I think the back end was where it was just the most open field. Because at this point, by the time I'd started on this code base, in the last 2 years from that point, I had probably built 10-ish separate things and like 10-ish different web apps, some like really small internal use. One was obviously Selectify. There were a couple of like other Monkey C projects that I was working on too. So I'd built up all of these different apps and they weren't joined by anything. Like each time I started one of these projects, it was very much starting just from ground zero, like starting from scratch. And I was like, I feel like I'm reinventing some wheels here over and over again. And I don't actually see a turnkey solution to any of this, including when you use like a Next.js template.
So what are these? What do you keep reinventing?
I think the two big things, right, were getting the database to actually link up to the front end was always super annoying because I was just trying to treat these things as objects. You know what I mean? Like I was trying to define some ORM to basically be like, oh, the user table has a first name string and a last name string. And I want to just use that everywhere else. You know what I mean? I want to like push that through to the front end. I want TypeScript to know that it's going to be these strings oriented in this way. I want to also create a database table that backs it. It was just like SQL Alchemy, SQL model. They just required a little too much friction to like really push these types from the back end to the front end. That was one thing. And then the other thing that I think is probably more major is I always felt myself having to re-implement these routes where if you're on some page, you're like editing some product or like some blog post on some CRM, you update the title, you update the description, you click save. What happens next? You like send some fetch request out to the server. It updates the database. And then you're kind of left as the front end to just collect the pieces. Like you have to yourself update the view that's actually being shown to the user, either based on the return query that comes back from that fetch, or you make some other fetch that gets some data, or you just guess and you're like, well, if we updated the title, we'll probably want to update the title that we show here, like whatever. It always felt like the
Mhm.
solution here is kind of just to refresh the page. You know what I mean?
So you
Like
don't,
if we
yeah.
if we
So
just
this is
like
different from use
refresh.
state and use effect. Like
So
what's your
so
beef, dude?
I kind of came up with this concept of use server, which
Okay,
is like all of the pipes that you're going to need to talk to the server, all the post requests you do, they're just going to be in one given payload that under the hood will like use effect and use state. But the use state and use effect are really just hooks to be able to put some data onto the front end and then to pick up on changes from that variable when it's modified. So
right.
that's use state defines a variable, then use effect actually pulls in the hooks, but that still leaves you to do all of these different fetch calls yourselves. Like you still have to actually have some route which exposes here's the data that you're going to push onto the page. And when you get into some of these like Next.js conventions, you both have, okay, well, you can do a server side rendering component of your given page component, but then you can't call that once you do the fetch. So then maybe we refactor it. Anyway, I could never find a clean way to do it. So I sat down on my sofa, that's right behind the camera, and I was like, if I could choose the API that I was using to develop a web app, what would it look like? And I basically ended up coming up with a concept for Mountaineer, which is this web app framework. And then also for, I think, the really core primitive, which is the idea that all of the data that should flow from the server to your front end has to be placed in Python in this render function. And then that data, you can call it fresh anytime you want it to.
And what's the
Like
argument for using Python here on the back end? Like, why not just use JavaScript?
I think the argument fundamentally actually comes down to the language level of things. I prefer Python as a language, but I think also structurally, you can do things with it that you can't cleanly or you can't at all within TypeScript. And in the case of keeping code clean and readable, I think the dynamic typing that you get at runtime in Python is pretty much unmatched. Like you can actually say in Python, given you have some, pydantic definition or you have some data dict, you can actually query in memory to say, what type should this field be or this variable be,
Mhm.
which internally is how actually Pydantic builds up its validators. Like it has to know what itself is defined as. And from there, it can do all this fancy typing validation. JavaScript doesn't have that. And TypeScript doesn't have that because TypeScript is just this layer on top of JavaScript that compiles down to regular JavaScript.
Yeah, just static, right? It's just a linter.
Yeah, by the time Node is actually running your code, it's like I have no idea what this variable should be. I just know what it is, and it's built off these prototypes. So I find Python to honestly just be a much more beautiful language on the back end. I think it gives you a lot of power to keep your code clean. And I think, especially with what I was doing at the time, which is building up a lot of different web apps, I kind of want to take the same thing that I really liked from solutions like Fast API, which was you type in these things, you know exactly where they have to be, and then it figures out all of the glue code behind the scenes and just do that for the whole application. Like
Mhm.
database all the way to front end. I never want to write the same line of code twice. That's kind of what I started off trying to accomplish with Mountaineer. And then that's what all of Say What is built off of.
I see. Okay. And so do you feel like Mountaineer let you bootstrap developing say what much faster, or do you feel like it's like just more of a, I don't know, more like an efficient system? Like what's the benefit, I guess, of using Mountaineer in the context of say what?
I think developer time
Okay.
dramatically reduced, like dramatically reduced. And I think one of the reasons why we won this space is because we could just move so quickly when users wanted us to roll out different features or like when the market changed, there's some new model drop and we're like, oh, we think we can actually incorporate that into a part of the stack. Being able to just tweak things so quickly and not really have to worry about it. This is actually probably something that's slightly embarrassing, but maybe is useful as a case in point. We actually don't have any staging server associated with Say What. I know. I can get flamed. It's bad form. But we really feel like we don't need it because the typing guarantees that we have as part of the library, like the checks that we can do at compile time when we actually are in CI, can be so strong that every release we do, we'll sanity check locally and then just send it out to prod. And we've never had a system crash because of that. And I think Mountaineer and keeping the abstraction layer that you actually have to develop with really simple and the ability to do static type checking for it that's given us a huge leg up on the competitors that I think are having to shoehorn their stacks into languages that probably weren't meant for it.
Oh, so interesting. So in the context of AI especially, like, do you feel like it's super important to have a type checking system for the outputs of these models because they can be so dynamic? Is that, I guess, the argument?
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's a huge part of it. I wrote up this little library actually to do something kind of like that. It was called deterministic, with kind of the idea that AI is actually very good, like LLMs and AI agents are actually very good at writing abstract syntax tree validators in a way that's very unnatural for humans to think about ASTs. LLMs can actually do very well. So you can kind of codify your own programming conventions as AST validators that are one offs to be like, these are the coding conventions that I want to enforce in my project. And then
Mm,
just run those like you would run, ESLint or rough on the back end. You can just
mm.
do that. So yeah, I mean, all my local coding agents are set up with hooks like, Claude Code or Codex. They're all set up with hooks to run the series of validators, which at this point is rough, which is a super fast type checker built
Mhm.
by Astral, TY, which is their same, but kind of on the language server side of things. And also this deterministic combination of a few hand rolled ASTs that we
Huh.
have that validate our code. And the combination of those three things don't make AI generate perfect code all the time, but I think are very useful in finding obviously erroneous things that the ML models have done and then having them self-correct them instead of me having to then review their work and saying, well, these are obviously wrong. It lets me focus a little bit more on core logic and logical flow. And also, I'll add, it stops them from being able to reward hack the same kind of way by modifying the tests that are under test and just doing like a try accept
Oh, I
blanket
see.
statement to make them pass because you can enforce that that paradigm just isn't allowable in the code that you write.
Gotcha. And then when you do deploy, I guess, can you tell a little bit more about like how does AI actually then factor in, not just in the development experience, but also in the actual app of say what kind of models are you guys using there? Are you guys like training your own stuff? Like how does that?
So I think probably the journey of writing a piece of content is the most obvious place where AI really comes into play here, where you need some models to develop the ideas for what people can write about. And there we leverage this huge content library of all of the different things that have succeeded on LinkedIn historically. We have a real time data feed of things that are succeeding right now. So we try to use that to be like, what is in the cultural conversation? Are people talking about some Apple execs retiring? Okay, maybe that's like a theme that you should really pick up on today. So like key one is surfacing the themes of what even should you write about. Users weigh in like up, down, yes, they like these, no, they don't. And then from there, they get into a writing view that's literally just like a Google Doc that they can author this thing on. And then we have both a sidebar agent that people can ask to flesh out more of the writing, which can handle some of the research as well as the authoring for them. And then there's the writing view where they can write. The biggest thing, the biggest ML model I think people will actually come into contact with is a custom trained writing model that we developed to sound more like the user's tone of voice than we were able to get with off the shelf LLMs.
That's really cool. Like this is on the fly personalization or something like this. Like how does?
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay.
it's like putting in a little like personality vector in between you would otherwise do generation in order to make hopefully prime the model that this is how the user sounds and encode their stylistic choices within that one vector that you can then use as the prior to output content.
Gotcha. So this isn't just like a black box thing that you're using. Like you're actually accessing the weights of the model and learning a user embedding somehow.
Yeah,
Wow. That's pretty cool, man.
on their past stuff, which I'll tell you has like pros and cons. The pro is it sounds like people. The con is it also sounds like people.
Uh-huh.
So sometimes when users have come to us and they've written some bad LinkedIn posts in the past, and they're like, "Why is your AI system giving me bad
Right.
posts?" It was primed on
You're
bad
pretty bad
posts.
at writing posts.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
totally.
Okay.
So
Interesting. Huh.
we had to make a toggle to basically allow you to turn on and off this personality vector
That's so funny. Depending on
because
how bad you are to begin with.
yeah, literally
Um,
people were just getting
so
bad posts.
how much research then goes into developing these models for you? Like what was your research process when you decided you want to do like this vector embedding approach?
I mean, I'll tell you truthfully, less than what you would probably need to get published for it, you
Okay.
know? I think the setting of doing industrial research I find to be you'll usually just take the first thing that works and like works past some satisfactory baseline and then productionalize that. you very rarely can allot yourself an amount of time to say, let's try to really do a deep dive in all the different directions and then pick the best one. It's more this depth first search process where you're like, okay, here's some idea that I know does work. All right, let's try to solve some other things after, now that we know that it's accomplished.
At what point do you think it would make sense for you guys to have a research lab in, say, what?
Probably never.
Probably never. Oh, so interesting.
It just
Yeah.
is a bootstrapped company. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? It's
yeah.
like, I don't think it could be something that we could really justify or afford, quite honestly. In other companies, I think it's a lot more relevant. Like when I was doing the computer use research,
Mhm.
I would have loved a huge research lab. I mean, that basically is like what Adept was doing before I think they got sold or they folded. Maybe they're still around.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think
Mm.
to really have a key research lab, I think you either want your company to be selling some API access, or you need a meaty enough problem of researchers to just really be able to bang their head around that same discipline and like still keep it research focused. In general, I think I tilt hiring a little bit more to like engineers that can just really churn out code with features that people will be happy with. But, I think it's super company specific.
And for you guys, I mean, it feels like the user experience, like the UX component of it is so paramount. If you can get that right, if you can get people happily writing on your platform, whether or not this like embedding personalization approach is 80% accurate or 85% accurate, doesn't really matter too much, right? It feels like it's really more about the analytics, the data, the writing experience, and just how your thing looks and feels, right? That matters a lot for this product.
Yeah. That's a good
Yeah,
point too. I mean, it's like
yeah.
the play that we really made in the early day was to say we want a product that isn't necessarily trying to own the entire user journey instead of just owning a component of it. Because I think the workflow that people get into is still a pretty defendable way to build software because it's sticky and it's like hard for people to duplicate. I think when you're throwing out one-off ideas into the wild, it's a lot harder to get people to stick in it for the long haul because they'll just find some alternatives. They'll
Right.
like just switch to using chat and kill down some of their subscriptions.
So how did I mean, speaking of that, like how did it feel when people were starting to like show you that there was PMF? Like when people started clearly feeling like this was a sticky product, first of all, how did you know that? And second of all, like how did that feel for you personally, man?
I was pretty wowed that this was the idea of all of them that really stuck, to be
Right.
totally honest. But I think that's just because I didn't feel the pain. Like I'm not really a content guy, and I'm especially not a LinkedIn content guy. So I couldn't empathize with the target user myself in a way to say, oh, like these busy people are just
Right.
spending hours of their lives to get 10 likes. Like what a horrible experience. And
Yeah.
I don't think I would have known. It was one of these like niche areas of the market that was just completely blind to. I think the product market fit thing, man, was just people saying it. Like the
Mm,
joy with which users unsolicited have reached out about this product is just staggering. Like frankly surprising, right? So this one woman reached out and she posted this in a group chat. So she sent us a screenshot of a group chat
okay.
with her and some other people that are in the same ecosystem. And she was like, this is one time that you actually need to follow the FOMO. It's a no brainer unless you enjoy doing hard things and suffering because it's a character building exercise. Subscribe or forever carry the regret of overthinking.
Wow. And
This,
so
and, it, and
you
it
don't know
goes
this
on.
person. Right.
I don't know this person. I have no idea who this
Wow.
is. And she sends this to us unsolicited and is like, if you get a bump in signups, this might be why. I think when people start evangelizing your own product, also without you really having to do anything, I think that there's a whole field of product marketing that try to build product evangelists that aren't already product
Right.
evangelists. I don't know how well that succeeds or not, but when you start getting people independently where they just are, singing it from the rooftops, they're trying to spread the gospel and you literally haven't done
Yeah.
anything
Yeah. That's
besides
great,
tell
man.
them about it and then maybe post yourself a little bit on social media. Like that's I think a marker of pretty clear product market fit, at least within this one dimension.
And you guys like didn't really take out any ads or anything, right? I guess like Will to a certain extent had a following. So it's kind of like a natural, organic form of advertisement. But still, man, I mean, that's like so cool. That must be a
Yeah.
great feeling. Like you build something and then some random person you have no idea, somewhere in whatever,
Crazy.
Wisconsin,
Yeah.
hits you up and is like, this is life changing for me,
Yeah. Totally. I think
Um,
that's a dream with software. That's
absolutely.
what
Yeah.
I've dreamed of this feeling like for a long time. And like I said, it's funny that it was this thing of all things, but it was.
That's great, man. So, I mean, not to be indiscreet here, but like, is this thing making a lot of money right now? How's it doing financially?
Yeah. So we're very margin positive. It's not cheap to host, right? Because we have to spin up these GPUs and call these ML models. So we like definitely have a decent cost basis. But I've spent so much time this year trying to minimize the costs that are in our control to be as small as possible, which is like why we wrote Mountaineer, basically, or like why we wrote this back end processing thing to replace temporal. It's like we were just spending tens of thousands of dollars on compute a month,
Really? On
which seems
compute?
insane. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because
To
you're
launch
not
a
on an
product
iLab.
this.
Like this is
No.
literally just server
Yeah.
compute. Right.
Totally.
Wow.
Yeah. This isn't even personnel fees, right? Like this is just hosting like the raw CPUs. And there was a ton of work that I just independently had to do to be like, all right, in order to try to make this profitable or try to make this maximally profitable, part of that for us is reducing costs. So that was a lot of the time that I spent this year. In addition to like building product was just trying to minimize costs. And yeah, we recently crossed 55,000 MRR a month for the product, which
That's
is
huge,
a
man. Yeah.
pretty big milestone. And we're happy about it. I mean, it's growing at a rapid clip. I think we're edging into like 1,000 people that are active users on it. And they're
Wow.
really happy, which is kind of what you want. I mean, it exceeded my wildest expectations, I think, for the amount of people that would be attracted to something like this. But as LinkedIn has continued to grow and there are more people that want to get in this content writing game and see it as valuable for their business, I think it's much more feasible. I think it also acts as kind of a proof point. You were talking about last step about some existence proof. In some ways, say what is actually an existence proof of the power of having some following on social media and then pushing some product through it. It's a slightly unique case just because it itself is kind of recursively the problem that we're trying to solve, target to the same kind of people. But I think people will also respond to the vision. They like look at Will and they're like,
Yeah.
you've built the kind of company that I would love to build myself. And then I think that has been pretty useful to get in front of other people too.
Do you think that another person could build a competitor at this point, or do you feel like you guys just have such a good product that it's kind of like you've come to dominate this little tiny niche of the world, that you occupy?
I mean, I think it's obviously possible. I think there are a decent amount of technical moats which are not apparent on the surface, but if you actually peel behind the curtain,
Mhm.
are hard to duplicate, right? Could you maybe get there with some of the computer use stuff that is being put out now by the Frontier Labs? Maybe, but I think we also had a pretty unique stack, which is not the stack that the pixel-based computer use approaches of Anthropic and OpenAI are angling towards. So mileage might vary to try to replicate our backend stack. But I think just in general, man, the nexus of the market that I think was interesting here, which is a takeaway, I think, for what I do next, is I think it is very valuable to be in a position where you're in a very boring market that is very complex. I think of like tax law like this, which is kind of how Intuit has managed to just stay dominant. No talented people from MIT or Stanford really want to go into writing software.
There's
tax
one
law.
guy that's pissed off at you right
Yeah.
now. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. That's just sorry, Sven.
Yeah, exactly. It's like this diagram you were telling me about, where boring, exciting.
Yes.
What was the other axis?
Difficult and like easy.
Right. So
Or rather, like complex and easy.
So yeah, someone like counterintuitively, you want to pick something that's boring but super hard, right?
Yeah.
Because then that is like naturally like a moat. It's like you have two moats almost. It's like you got the moat just at the level of this is kind of boring, and then the moat that's more obvious, which is this is difficult to do, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Totally. Because the quadrant of this graph, it's like the classic consulting 2x2. The quadrant of this graph, which is really exciting and really complex, are companies like SpaceX.
Yeah.
Or maybe some of these frontier companies, you know what I mean? Where you're solving like super, super hard problems with unbelievably talented people that are doing it with you. But that also means that your competition is going to be the people that are like super talented as well. And I think those are very intellectually enriching places to be. But if you're trying to start a company and angle towards profitability or financial profit, it's a very hard place to be.
Yeah.
And if you're in the places that are boring, but it's pretty easy to do, then I think that's where a lot of the vibe coders are just going to come out because they'll say, well, I have some problem for my desk job. I'm just going to make some software to solve that like one off. The fact that you combine like it's really boring with it's complex, I think is a defendable moat. I think the bigger challenge that you end up getting into long term is your ability to find talent to work on those problems because it becomes a little bit diminished for the aforementioned reasons of they're just trying to chase the exciting things. But I think when you're bootstrapping a company and you're keeping it lean, it's really you, one other co-founder, you maybe a few employees, that becomes much more viable of a reason to work in. And I think leads to some inherent moats that are just based on the market dynamics.
Yeah, I mean,
it's also not a very VC fundable space, which I think helps too.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, like, where do you go from here? Like, what's the plan? Are you trying to get VC money or?
Not for this. I think Say What is profitable. It's here to stay. It's continuing to chug. Like it's growing at a fast pace. So I think from the Say What POV, I think that will probably continue in more or less the business dynamic that it's operated in. We are looking to bring on a couple more people on board recently to try to, hire out on the technical side of things and then some of the customer support side of things. So it'll probably look a little bit different in a year's time frame than it is exactly right now, where Will and I have been manning most of the burdens of doing this.
I mean, all
but
of
I think
basically.
yeah, totally. I think in terms of the next thing, I kind of want to do a little bit of what you did during the PhD, which is some swing for the fences move.
Okay.
I think it's been nice that this whole experience and this product has given a little bit of a financial buffer, quite honestly, to feel like you have something in the bank, you have some income. Going from having a salary to not having a salary in the early days of starting a company is one of the craziest binaries that I've experienced, because you're literally looking at your savings account, your investment accounts go up month over month, more or less automatically, to them going down.
Yeah, they're not even flat. It's like
they're not even flat. Yeah, they're literally like you're withdrawing. You're taking out a debt against future you. So now that we're no longer in that situation, we're in a privileged place to have a little bit more flexibility. I am trying to kind of take some time, maybe in later December in the new year, to try to take a step back and think, okay, what is next? Answer that question. But I think the parameters, as far as I'm concerned, are trying to work with really talented people. I think that's been a consistent. That's always what I'm looking to. And I think trying to bite off some more of these meaty topics, using some of the lessons that I've learned to dovetail that forward, because there's just so many things out there to do. I feel like we're kind of like kids in a candy store where there's a lot of opportunity, but I think figuring out exactly what that swing is still a little TBD.
Dude, well, I'm excited to see what you do.
I'm excited to swing together, man. We'll see.
We'll see, dude. I mean, don't wanna bite off more than I can chew or count my chickens before they hatch. But I feel like 2026 is gonna be a good year. And actually, that's what I want to do in next episode. I feel like next week, what we want to do is I want to talk about predictions for 2026, things that are interesting, and what projects we're interested in working on. I think this is like the perfect place to end it, because this perfectly segues us into our final 2 episodes for the end of the year. How does that sound?
Wow. Exciting. Yeah.
All right.
I'll
Awesome,
do some
man.
before next week.
Cool, buddy. Well, have a great weekend. And as always, buddy, it's a pleasure talking.
We'll talk then. Definitely. Later,
All right,
Rich.
baby. Bye.
Bye.